eventually. Bienvenue, welcome once again to another property podcast. This is, of course, Property Quorum, a bit of a bun fight between different members of the property community. We have our favourite tame lawyer, Zahrah Aullybocus of Nexa Law. We have, of course, Silas J, social commentator of the Maverick movement about all things property. And, of course, don't forget Wiggy Wham and Hamish McLay of Search Convey. A man who has seen a lot of things go by and wonders why it has, mostly to do with property. And here we are debating and talking about specific topics. Today is no different, of course. We're talking about the conveyancing conundrum, or should I say, the deadline that conveyancers cannot ignore. And, of course, to start us off, Hamish McLay.
Well, yes, indeed. It's certainly something that can't be ignored, because when we next speak on Property Quorum, it would have been introduced. The HMRC, our wonderful tax people, have decided that it's about time that our conveyancers, not so much conveyancers as well, I guess, but property lawyers should also become tax advisors as well, as though they didn't have enough to do. When I go way back, well, it's only 2 decades, and I got involved in this this particular side of the business, there wasn't anything like as complicated a scenario as we now have. And one side of that was, in fact, that the work of the conveyancer, because we didn't tend to have sort of conveyancers then. We more had sort of, we tended to more have the solicitors, property solicitors. It was, I think, 2007 which changed things. Zahrah, I'm sure, will remind us about this. However, there's more and more complications being introduced on behalf of mainly people who aren't involved with it themselves, but to try and get more and more work out of the property lawyers for, in some respects, even less money.
Wow. All right. Well, I think on that moment, we should move to our lovely property lawyer, Zahrah. So, lawyers, they obviously, what's happened is HMRC have felt that you guys have far too much free time, and therefore you need to take on yet another role. Of course, you can fit this in between everything else, including childcare, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's numerous reasons for them introducing it. Not to mention, the whole thing was sparked by, the Deputy PM, Angela Rayner, not paying enough stamp duty on her transaction. That should have been caught, and the conveyancers should have said, I'm not budging until you provide me with the advice that you've had. And any conveyancer worth their salt would have taken that stance. I've had clients that have come to me with unusual situations where, they're from Eastern Europe and they own a little percentage in a property, and they're like, oh, it's not really mine yet, but I've got a share in it. And so that kind of thing counts. So it's got more complex over time. Not to mention the multiple dwellings relief, which was, the subject of many claims. So, we've had all sorts of complications where conveyancers are expected to advise, but the public seem to think that they should be within our remit, and they're not prepared to pay for and take independent advice from specialists just to make sure they don't get it wrong. I've made sure that my clients get specialist advice, especially with what I do, shared ownership. That could be a real pickle. And the HMRC guidance on that is still bananas. It's pants. You can't follow it. I still get colleagues asking me, can you help me with this? How do I work this out? How do I work that out? I've got other solicitors calling me up saying, can you help me? Or I've got people calling me up saying, my solicitor can't do this. Can you tell them how to do it? I'm like, no. They should either guide you to getting the independent advice or, have the knowledge that I do and trying to work it out themselves. But, it's not just when you're buying. Stamp duty might come in when you're selling. For shared ownership, if you're doing simultaneous sale with a staircasing, that the staircasing element would, attract stamp duty. And so some people have paid stamp duty when they were selling and doing simultaneous staircasing. And I've learnt from fabulous expert Sean Randall, who's written the book for the Law Society, that there's a relief for that. But a lot of conveyancers, unfortunately, the standard is now going downhill because since the 2007 Services Act, you don't have to be legally qualified to sit behind a computer, press loads of buttons and say you're a conveyancer. So, a lot of people will take on these jobs and not realise what is actually involved until they get into the thick of it. And then procrastination sets in because then it's something that they feel they can't deal with. So they think by ignoring it, it will go away.
Okay. Well, this seems madness, Silas. We're expecting our already beleaguered lawyers to take on more roles. We're expecting conveyancers who are untrained to take on more roles. Surely this cannot work.
Well, what to my mind, Gareth, what Zahrah has just outlined in a brief commentary is some of the nuances that actually go into what is quite a complex area of law and tax. And it bothers me that this complexity is then being pushed onto people, as you say, that may not have the requisite qualification or it's not their profession at all. As we've said before on Property Quorum, why would you go to an accountant for tax advice? Why would you go to a solicitor for tax advice? And that's not to belittle any of those professions, but it is a specialist subject. And what tends to happen in these sorts of scenarios is most people, I'm not going to include Zahrah in this because obviously she's got the right specialist behind her, but most people will err on the side of caution because they don't want to create a whole load of trouble or the possibility of an investigation or, HMRC letters coming through your door. They want to avoid all of that. So, if the client gets penalised by another 500 quid in overpayment of tax, it's not really their problem. And I'm not saying that's really what's going on, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility to understand that these are the sorts of things that will happen in order to protect the backsides of the conveyancers who have had this thrust upon them. I personally would, God forbid, if I needed brain surgery, I wouldn't be going to a vet. That's literally the analogy of how I see things unfolding in the legal profession at the moment. And more to the point, where are the regulators standing up for the conveyancers, for the solicitors, pushing back to HMRC to say, no, this is not our profession. You cannot just merge, veterinary science with brain surgery. That the two things are completely different specialisms. Why are we being allowed to actually, have this put upon us? And that's something that I think we need to. The industry needs to be pushing back on, but I don't see many signs of that actually happening.
Well, that's some craziness there. Hamish, surely this cannot continue.
Well, it is continuing. I didn't realise. I mean, it was Zahrah that sort of inferred this, that basically it came about as a consequence of what one of our sort of senior politicians not being able to sort of muster up, not being able to take the appropriate advice, which she should have done. I think there were two different directions she was given this advice from. Because of her failures, all of a sudden it becomes a responsibility of every property lawyer, every conveyancer to become a tax advisor if they want to actually sort of carry on in the same way which they were previously. And it's an encumbrance that is totally unnecessary. because there are tax advisors out there. And basically, when we look at this again, and we have this, I mean, Silas reinforces this. We look at the situation, people will spend almost a fortune on going away on holiday. And when it comes to actually paying the appropriate fees for the appropriate conveyancer, they will question it, they will expect a ridiculously quick answer, and everything to be absolutely covered. I mean, one of the things that worried me, I mean, I wasn't aware about this staircasing idea until Zahrah pointed it out. That was some months ago now, so I'm becoming educated. But when you look at staircasing, and when you combine that with sort of the aspects of sort of shared ownership, and the knowledge that I now have of people who have tried to work through this without very little success, they are suffering because they are going to the wrong people, and they're not going to the property owners, particularly if they happen to be sort of the local council, or they happen to be the other side, the social housing. They won't necessarily get the appropriate guidance from that particular side of things. So it really is a matter of people listening to the likes of Zahrah, because you have to listen to an expert.
Can I just chip in there, Hamish?
Please do.
It's got so much more complicated over the years. Something that should have been straightforward is because the government know that property brings them a lot of income from the stamp duty, and that's why they made it more complicated, so they could get money from people who already have money, in terms of people with second properties, and also people coming from abroad buying here, so they see it as another revenue stream, or to boost government coffers from buying and selling properties. But I should also just say there's lots of companies out there that were ambulance chasing, trying to get people refunds for stamp duty, and perhaps HMRC were flooded with all these requests that perhaps weren't legitimate. So, they're wasting that department's time looking into stuff that didn't merit it.
Wow. Silas, can you put some colour on this?
That's a very, very good question, Gareth. I'm just looking at the comment that's just come in here from Def Spencer, saying that if you were standing in front of the SRA tomorrow and you were asked to justify every stamp duty land tax filing you'd made in the last 12 months, would you walk out with your certificate intact? And I honestly think that that is a situation that would send a shiver down every single conveyancer and law firm owner's spine, because the honest answer is there will be some ambiguity. And what bothers me intensely about where this country is, it's not just in isolation around this idea of tax advice being thrust upon conveyancers. It's the whole idea of the state needed to generate more revenue, and the only method they have to do that is tax. And that is despite the massive amount of tax that the British public are paying right now, we can look around us and see that services are declining. We can see that there is a general unhappiness in the British population with how much we're being taxed to the hilt, and not getting any return on that. And we have to look at where that money is actually going. That's a conversation that is quite uncomfortable, because not many people are prepared to put that under the microscope and actually say, well, where's all their hard-earned money going? If it was a business being run this way, it would have been bankrupt many, many years ago. And yet the state relies upon the idea of force to actually extract more and more wealth from the British people, if we're going to put it that way. So I do have great reservations. If I was in the situation of buying property right now, would I rely solely upon the advice given to me from the conveyancing solicitor? In all fairness, probably not. Tax affairs are complex. You should be going to a tax specialist. You should be having specialist advice, and you should be, with respect, paying for that. I've said in the past that more people are spending money to go away for a 2-week holiday in the sun each year than they're paying for the conveyancing that's going to put where they're buying their most expensive asset, and they're going to pay a mortgage on that for the next 20 years. to me, the two are so incomprehensible that people are doing that. But we're not paying for the specialist advice, and it's a shame that it's being thrust upon the conveyancers rather than the individual themselves who are buying property.
Yeah, can I just chip in there, Silas?
Oh,
you know,
please.
a lot of there are a lot of specialist stamp duty companies out there saying to conveyancers, you know, outsource this, we'll do it all for you. But HMRC are saying that if you are making payment to us, you're still a tax advisor, which is they don't sit together very well. So either it's outsourced completely, and the lenders understand this, because part of the issue is that you know, we're expected by the mortgage lenders to make sure we get their title registered in a timely manner. But you know, submission of the stamp duty form, payment of the stamp duty is something that they want under the conveyancer's control, so that we can get it done quickly. Now, if we start outsourcing this, you know, it creates all sorts of complications. You know, the money will have to go to the third party stamp duty company, and they don't want to be dealing with that. So we've got this imbalance of companies out there saying it's all our risk, we'll sort out these forms for you, you sign up to our platforms, you pay this fee of £50 plus VAT, whether or not the transaction completes. So that cost is incurred, whatever happens. But the liability still falls back to the conveyancer. Regardless of how much research, how much advice we get, it still lands on our head.
Wow. Well, it seems confusion reigns. Hamish, can you help clear this up?
I think you're on mute.
I think you're on mute. You managed to mute yourself. All right. Look, Silas, in fact, while Hamish sorts out his mute, can you explain if there's a way through this?
I'll be frank, Gareth. This is outside of my area of expertise because I'm not sitting directly in a law firm. I have grave concerns about where this path leads, and I genuinely feel sorry for all of the conveyancers who are out there trying to do a really good job for their clients, and more is being heaped upon them, but there is no movement upwards in the requisite fee that they're being provided with for doing that work. So I think this is potentially a sign of things to come. There's potentially more things in the pipeline where conveyancers will be held to ransom. You don't do this, therefore there's various sanctions, various penalties. What's the impact on, you know, professional indemnity insurance, the availability of indemnity insurance if you start getting stamp duty submissions wrong? I think there's a whole lot more that could be coming down the track that are going to leave conveyancing firms and law firms paying higher premiums, more confusion, having to seek specialist advice or bring specialists in-house, which obviously comes at a cost. You're not going to get a tax advisor, I wouldn't have thought, for less than about 50,000-60,000 a year to sit underneath the roof of your business. So whether we will see tax companies and law firms merging as a way to accommodate this, I don't know. But it doesn't sit well with me that we are now expecting one profession to prop up so many other things. And I think conveyancers should be banding together and actually standing for themselves and their profession.
Unfortunately, there, Silas, the representative bodies are just saying, yeah, okay, they're not making enough noise. They're not saying this should not be on our plate. There's nobody out there that's willing to stand up for us to say enough is enough.
Correct.
I did have that saying, you know, do less but do it better. So if they want this done, it should be given to somebody else. And of course, we've got issues where, you know, partway through a transaction, a client changes their mind about how they're funding it. Client could change the purchase price, which then changes the stamp duty. So we've got all those things to think about that do change during the transaction. And so are they going to be willing to pay for all these changes?
Quite right. And this is the disappointing fact that we don't have these bodies now across the entire property industry. I'm going to include estate agents in there. I'm going to include conveyancers in there. As Zahrah's quite rightly pointed out, that they're not taking the lead and actually standing up for the members that they purport to represent. And this is one of the founding reasons why we've come up with this idea of the Maverick movement, is that we can hopefully take that forward and fight on their behalf, because nobody else is doing it, and it's a real shock that members have been part of these organisations for years, if not decades, spent thousands in membership fees, and they're getting nothing in return.
Wow. Hamish, given we're at the end of the programme, would you care to take us home?
Well, I think the best answers have come from Zahrah, in the fact that she's the most knowledgeable of all of us sort of here. And I would hate to be in her shoes yet again with the, this additional work, which is absolutely nowhere near simple at all. But it's a matter of education. We need to let the layman know out there that your straightforward transaction, or the one which you expected to be, was in no way straightforward at all. You need to listen to the expert and not the one that wants to spoon you through it as quickly as possible.
It just seems to me that as Zahrah told me privately, it's going to drive more and more people out of the profession, frankly. And look at what we've got recently, the extra pressure on landlords, which has pushed a lot of landlords out of the profession, the extra pressure on lawyers, which is going to push more and more of them out of the profession, and the lowering in quality in conveyancing overall, the rise of factory conveyancing. I think it's all cycling down to one place, and I'm not sure I would like to even describe where that place is right now. Let's hope it doesn't go that way. Thank you once again to, of course, Silas J. Lees of the Maverick Movement, Hamish McLay of Search Convey, and of course Zahrah Aullybocus, who has definitely come armed with information today. Thank you so much for that. And until next week, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars. Don't forget, tomorrow is Cladding Matters with our all-important deadline. It was last week. We had an issue that we could not, was insuperable, but this week we're all ready, and we want to hear from anyone in Greenwich Council or anyone in support or against it. Please come on the show, make your voices heard. Until tomorrow, please make sure you look after your mental health. Bye-bye now.